Hello, everyone. My name is Liz. I'm known as the Cosbrarian on TikTok. I'm sharing an interview and conversation I had with Komal Salman, the lovely person behind Folkloristan. Folkloristan is a website and social media project that focuses on corralling and promoting the immense culture of folktales of Pakistan. Originally, I had recorded this for my Patreon audience, but because I'm so passionate about Komal's work, I'd like more people to learn about it and celebrate it, and I'd like her folks to have access to our conversation as well. So it's one of my rare YouTube appearances. This was my first time running an interview, on Zoom over thousands of miles no less, so forgive the sound quality and casual nature. I provided a transcript for those who'd like to read along. My thanks to Komal for taking the time to talk with me about the work she's been doing, as well as about her favorite tales and creatures in Pakistani lore. And thanks to her and you for patience in how many different ways I pronounced Pakistan in one conversation. It was a great chat, and I loved getting to know Komal and her country's tales better. Great, so I thought if you could start out, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and your background.
So basically, my name is Komal Salman, and I was raised in Islamabad. That's the capital of Pakistan for those of our audience who are unfamiliar with geography. I just finished my undergrad in mass communications, and I'm a media production major. I started Folkloristan in November last year. I also did a research paper on folklore, and I'm currently working on another one, which is centered around, the last one was centered around problems with documentation, and this one is centered around folklore and colonialism. And I'm also an NFT artist, and I'm currently working as an NFT advocacy lead at a think tank here in Islamabad.
I already have other questions about your other research in my mind. So, for those who are unacquainted with Folkloristan, can you tell us a little bit about that project?
So basically, Folkloristan came out of an idea after I was doing a paper. I was working on my paper on problems with documentation, and I was looking for suggesting potential techniques which we could use to document Pakistani folklore, because that is something Pakistan generally lacks in a lot. And then I came across this Japanese guy who was an officer in the government. And what he did with one of his friends was that they published an advertisement in the newspaper, and they asked for people to send them submissions, and then they started editing all those submissions and putting them down there. So I decided that instead of doing that in newspaper, I should take to Twitter to do that. And I just made a random tweet, and I think within 3 or 4 weeks, I had around 100 stories. And I was like, you know what, this is great. Unfortunately, the publishing scene in Pakistan isn't really that good either. So I wasn't able to get it out in a book. And I decided, you know what, why not let's make a website out of them and let's make this a thing. So I decided to do that. I've had a few collaborations here and there with some artists. There is this Japanese artist I collaborated with. So she did this really adorable series of anime characters in like Pakistani ethnic wear. And then I made these avant-garde art style dances, folk dances. I'm posting them, and then there's another artist. She made some really cute folklore illustrations, and we're gonna be reposting them soon. So I also just want to sort of, boost artists working in that space. So and Folkloristan works in a lot of languages. We work in the 5 major local languages, and we also have translations up in 5 international languages.
The art is so beautiful. That's one of my favorite aspects of
You.
the site. So that's a really lovely part of it. How big is the team of people you have working on it since you're working in so many languages with the artwork?
The people who offered to, sort of help me out with the translations, they're all volunteers, and otherwise it's just me. I did the website, I did the Instagram, I'm managing all the social media, I'm managing the Twitter account, I am taking out the content, posting it every day. So yeah, it's like a one-woman show. It gets really hectic at times because yeah, I had my dissertation going on and things were very crazy. But yeah.
That's incredible. It's a huge project, I imagine, to do on top of just like make living your life.
It is like that sometimes.
I'd love for you to tell me a little bit more about this initial paper that you had on the problems with documentation in folklore. Um, I'm assuming is this in particular to Pakistani folklore in particular?
Yeah, it was in particular to Pakistani folklore. And it was like the first paper I sort of actually worked on. And I was pretty proud that people on research page were actually reading it because every time I get a notification, I'm like, oh, well, they read it my work. Was it that good? I co-authored it with one of my classmates. I sort of established how folklore is a very important form of storytelling and how we're losing it because of rapid urbanization. We're also losing out on a lot of traditional knowledge and process. And I went over how it's directly correlated to Pakistan's own problems. One of them is very low rates of national literacy. And the other one is that Pakistan has around over 70 languages. And a lot of these, they don't even have written scripts. They are completely oral. That is also a challenge we face. And then, heritage conservation, one thing it does need is funding, lots and lots of funding. I tried to explore some examples and, because a lot of the country's lore, like even in very diverse regions, like we have deserts and we also have mountains and we have plains. A lot of the lore essentially has some very, very common themes, which are rooted in cultural values, like, for instance, not lying or not bullying each other or respecting certain cultural norms, values of honor, uh, unrequited love. It's apparently one of a favorite Pakistani pastimes. And after that, I went on to list some notable efforts which have been made to document folklore, and which of these could be adapted to, sort of fix in with the current Pakistani scape to document as efficiently as possible with as less funds as possible.
What's the scope of the project? Is it mostly focusing on folk tales, or is it all sorts of aspects of folklore?
Folkloristan itself, on the website, I just focus solely on folktales. But as for the Twitter, because like you sort of have to keep putting out content, I usually, pick anything which I find, very interesting. Like for this 1 week, I did a thread on dragons because Pakistani mythology does share dragons with a bunch of countries in Central Asia. And then we have this one other demon, which is common between Pakistani, Irani, Afghan, Turkish, Armenian, and Southern Russian mythology. So I just find these interesting connections and I draw on them. And then, I just sort of put things together. Because honestly, I think it's fascinating how mythology just oozes beyond borders. Like it's like a whole different world.
Absolutely. It's a unique thing to connect us, I think.
It definitely is.
I don't even know how they could do it, but if they could make some kind of like map to see how stories have traveled everywhere, I'm sure that's an impossible task. I know when I share stories with my audience on TikTok, one of the fun parts is people saying, "Oh, I know a story like that from where I'm from, but this is the twist on it.
I came across a couple of stories. They have different versions in different languages in Pakistan.
It's incredible.
Or it's like essentially the same story, just different names, different creatures, but like the essence is the same. And I'm like, wow.
Absolutely. Part of what makes it special is this like oral tradition, right? Where the storyteller is going to influence the story a little bit, which I'm sure helps color these different versions.
I think what's also fascinating is that it's still, even today, it's very hard to travel from one end of the country to the other. I wonder how that story got from that end to this end with like, all of these changes. How did it happen?
Yeah. The little people, the chain of people maybe that it went through or whatnot. So what are some of the folk tales that are particularly significant to Pakistan?
I think the first thing on the list would be the Seven Queens of Sin. This was the magnum opus of the Sufi Sindhi mystic, and I think it's so basically these are these seven women who take the form of seven queens, and it's seven stories. All of them are centered around mysticism and unrequited romance. And I think that is something which sort of stands out in lore, and also in terms of the fact that it's sort of different take on lore because lore usually sort of tends to be male dominated. Another thing I think which is very significant about Pakistani lore is that because of our position, we have absorbed creatures from a lot of various mythologies. Like we have evidence of Pegasi, we have dragon lakes, and we have witches, which we share with India and Bangladesh. And then we have female heart stealing demons, which we share with Iran and Turkey. So I think that just makes up a sort of a very interesting case. Other than these major romances, I think ghost hunting tales are the thing in Pakistan. Like if you want interesting ghost hunting adventures, read Pakistani folklore. You're going to find so many things there.
I feel like that's a universal interest.
Ghost hunting is definitely a universal interest. And I mean, it's very understandable. Like, what else do you do sitting around a fire if not talk about ghosts? It's just a vibe.
Absolutely. And it's a good thing to explain some of the weird stuff that happens.
It did turn into a very scary experience for me, to be honest. I was on this graduation trip with my friends for a week, and we went very far up north in the country, into the mountainside. And we were sitting around this bonfire at 1:30 a.m. and we decided to tell each other ghost tales. And yeah, I think some of the ghosts there got very upset. It was like we actually felt things and saw things and heard things, and we were very scared.
That sounds horrifying. I'm a little bit of a
It was, I mean, we were sitting by the bonfire, we put it out, we get up, suddenly we turn back and it turns back on 10 times the size of the fire it was when there were like 25, 30 people around it.
Oh my word.
And then someone slapped our windows. We saw smoke, we saw an eye staring at us. We heard voices, and yeah, it was scary.
I loved recently on Twitter you were sharing a bunch of mythology around rainbows. Following your Twitter account is it illustrates how diverse the lore is.
Definitely.
How sprawling. It's really exciting. I don't know if this is the same answer as maybe we just gave, but do you have a particular favorite folk tale?
I do have two particular favorite folktales. One of them is from my home province. It's about two tribes who went to war. One of the tribes won the war, but a boy from that tribe pulled off the veil of a girl from the other tribe, and they went to war again, and they lost all the land. I think that's just very significant in terms of me because like there are some things which we hold very culturally important to us, and that just it just speaks a lot about the culture. And there is another folktale. It's about this female ghost hunter who ends up in disguise as a man.
That sounds really fun. Are those on the site?
One of these is. The second one, I'm working around the illustration for it.
Do you take submissions for the artists you work with?
The art is mostly just me or artists I speak to when I ask them if I can use their characters, because like designing characters from scratch is very, very hard.
A lot.
One thing I really do struggle with is the fact that I feel like Pakistan is very underrepresented in the digital space. So if you Google girl sitting under your tree, you will find her, let's say wearing a jeans or a t-shirt or a frock, but it's very hard to find that same reference which will fit in with the folklore from Pakistan. And then I just try to, take the easier way out sometimes because I'm like, I already have so much to do. I feel bad about it, but like, yeah.
No, there's only so many things you can carry. It's not surprising that that's an issue. I try to share diverse folklore, but I always worry about my sources because 90% of the time I'm running into these folklore collections that are by a bunch of white guys in the Victorian era, which doesn't give me a lot of faith in in the sources or the point of view or the representation. So it's exciting to me to see people doing the work for their country, for their culture.
What I have noticed in English translations of local lore, the first thing I have noticed is that our anti-colonial resistance heroes have largely been very, very ignored. And not just from one province. Like we had this very legendary folk hero who fought Vasco da Gama from Portugal in Balochistan. I have not come across an English translation or a Portuguese translation of him. We had this one other small-scale register called Labati in Punjab. Also, I find it like there's this certain element of whitewashing to it. Like as somebody who's passionate about lore, for me, the word fairy for anything outside of Celtic and outside of Celtic and British lore just doesn't settle well with me.
Mm-hmm.
Because like fairy is a very specific creature. In Urdu, we have the word pari. So instead of just retaining the word pari, they just decided to call it the closest English alternative, which is fairy. And if you compare a fairy and a pari, they have some vastly different characteristics. They look the same, but their personalities are very, very different. And sometimes that just kind of makes me sad.
That makes sense, and it's not something I ever thought about. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Some of the things that I talk about are like the differences between folk tales and fairy tales that aren't from the folk tradition. Is that something that you explore as part of Folkloristan, or is it mostly the tales that have been passed down through the years?
It's mostly just tales because like I reach out to people and I ask them that if you can please send me a recording of this tale. And then I reach to another friend who ideally speaks the same language as his first language. And I'm like, can you please translate this for me?
Yeah.
So I haven't been able to get to that level of organization as yet. But if I, have a team of like 5-6 people, which I hope to expand into soon, so then I will definitely get into that.
So my followers really like fairy tales that are a little dark or maybe very mature or a little wacky. And I wondered, what are some of your favorite darker or like, I don't know, unconventional, for lack of a better word, tales from Pakistan?
Actually, there's too many of them to count.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so there's this one tale about how a British officer and a prince of Chitral. Chitral is it used to be a small princely state in like what is now northern Pakistan. They both had this like face-off trying to impress each other. And the British officer said a lot of not so nice things. And so did the prince. And that's just sort of become a tale. Then there was this one other folktale about a king who apparently, how I've always grown up on tales which, the king's or the queen's soul is somewhere safe in a cave or in an animal. This is the first time I found the king's soul to be in like a bar of butter.
I love that.
And I mean, that was just funny because the people decided to overthrow the king by taking fire lanterns to his house one fine night. And because his daughter was involved in the rebellion, there's this rock right in the center of the river, and she's said to be like, that was sort of her cage. A lot of Pakistani folklore has to do with what we call basically daddy issues, because for some reason there are so many pathetic examples of men leaving their wives in the middle of nowhere, leaving their daughters in the middle of nowhere. Why?
Yeah,
Why?
the ladies aren't treated very well in these stories.
Yeah. So one thing I do find, it's sort of funny. This whole romanticism for, dying in love or going insane in love. Like, there are so many stories. There are so many stories. I mean, like, why would you walk across two provinces just to die in the desert?
I don't know.
I mean, just let the other person go. Who has that much motivation to love someone?
Yeah, there's a lot of tales in the canon I've been reading recently where boy falls in love with girl at ball, party, feast, church, wherever, and then just like withers away when the attention is not given. What's your hope for the future of the Folkloristan project?
I hope to take Folkloristan to Web3. I want to sort of release this NFT collection, which if even if it's not based on photography, it's sort of based on like digital illustrations. But I want to incorporate some lore with some illustrations. Currently, we had this first B2B collaboration of ours with an indie publishing firm here in Pakistan. So we have a writing contest open, and the themes we're taking are historical fiction, ethnographic fiction, and stories which embody creatures from lore. So if anybody of you from your listeners wants to come up with an imaginary tale with lots of fun and very weird and very dark creatures, you're welcome to enter.
Lovely.
Our submissions are open till the 10th of July.
Very cool. Is there any way for folks to support the project or your work?
Financially or not as yet, because in Newsflash, Pakistan does not have a PayPal, which is why I haven't shifted it to Patreon yet. So I'm just, getting there and struggling to find a way and, set up revenue streams. And once I have that set up, then I will definitely reach out to you to remind your people that, hey, this girl with really big glasses came once for a podcast. Now she needs support, so please help her out.
Absolutely. I'll totally share. Where are all the places that people can follow the Folkloristan project?
Folkloristan has its website up, and Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
If folks were hoping to share stories from Pakistan folklore, what is some guidance that you would give them, especially if there are folks like me who are not part of the culture? Like, what are some, I don't know, are there like traps that you feel like storytellers keep falling into, or what are ways that you would like these stories to get shared in a respectful way?
I think one problem Pakistani folklore does face is that if an outsider, for instance, read those things in English, to be honest, they would come off as borderline racist.
Sure.
I mean, there's that understandable factor that people 4, 5, 6, 7, 800 years ago weren't exactly as woke as we are today. But I think stuff like that can, backlash a lot. And then there are certain things like Islamic beliefs have a lot of influence on very, very subtle or very, very obvious levels. And for a person who doesn't know the culture, I think they should just do that adequate amount of background research and speak to a few people from like varied backgrounds and just, write accordingly so that they don't end up offending someone. That's all.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. When I have shared some stuff I'm trying to work now more with creators from the culture for the tales that I share, of course, to make sure my own bias isn't interfering. And And because, yeah, there's a strange response sometimes, I think, if I share a tale from Japan that has a really funny, that's maybe a little sexy or a little dark or whatever. And people forget that, like, for one thing, all of these cultures have these tales, and the Grimm brothers may not have like recorded all the like scatological humor that there is in some German folklore, but
And I think territory has something to do with them, because some areas just have darker tales and scarier creatures than others. Like in Pakistani folklore, I've noticed that even the wicked creatures in the area where there are plains, they aren't so bad. Once you go into the mountains or you go into the desert, it's suddenly a complete shitstorm.
oh, that's fascinating. I wonder if there's a
So,
top topographical element to that, like of the
I
land.
I think I think there is, because one, there's also this basic Islamic belief that the supernatural is a lot more powerful in places which are less populated.
Mhm.
And there's the Prophet Solomon, which I think would be familiar to a lot of Western audiences as well. In Islamic tradition, Solomon is believed to have control over the supernatural. And what lore and legends say is that he had two prisons, which are now somewhere in present day Pakistan. And that's why those regions have the strongest concentration of the supernatural. And both of these regions are very, very rough terrain. One is like a mountainous, rocky desert, and the other one is very, very high peaks. Like, it's the 6, 7 highest peaks of the world.
Oh wow.
It's the Himalayan mountain range. So it's like very rough terrain.
Cool. Well, so then I had a question, just not knowing a lot about Pakistan. I wondered, like, and knowing that y'all are going through a lot based on what you've been telling me. But if you were hosting someone from outside of the country, like, what are some of the places or things you would introduce them to that you feel like?
Okay, I would start with food. No questions asked. Pakistani food is the food everybody must try.
Excellent.
Like, I feel like people would be missing out. And also, I'm not sure how many white people would be familiar with this, but like Pakistanis have this thing. There is no concept of paying your own bill. If you're a guest at someone's place, you're a guest, period. You will just hand yourself over to them.
Oh, that's lovely.
And like people genuinely get into fights over who's gonna pay because everybody wants to pay. It's
Oh,
just considered a gesture of being, friendly. And it's like this thing of honor. Like we consider it that it's an honor because people are, trusting us in coming to be our guests.
that's
So
lovely.
the first thing would be food. The second thing would be Lahore, Peshawar, and Karachi. These are three very, very rich cities in terms of history. You will find Sikhism, Buddhism, ancient Kadaran civilizations, remains of the Indus Valley civilization. Um, there's British era monuments there, pre-British era, Mughal era buildings there. They're just very, very historically and culturally rich. And if you meet people from these three cities, I think you get a fair idea of what Pakistan is like. And yeah, again, these three cities have the best food, and so does Quetta. One thing I would really like to do is take them to Quetta just for the adventure, because like Quetta is sort of a valley and it has mountains all around it. So the lore around the mountains is very, very fascinating. So if you're a folklore enthusiast, Quetta is your place to go.
Awesome. Those are sort of the only official questions I've had for today. Um, but I still want to talk more.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Some time.
I'm really enjoying this conversation.
I am as well. This interview I'd like to share on my Patreon, which is a smaller audience, but my audience on TikTok is very large.
Your TikTok is inspirational.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for watching. Um, well, so I'd love to share the project, and I'd love to share it through a story. And so I've been doing, I don't know if you've seen this collaborative project I mentioned, Folklore with Friends. So if you'd like to be involved in something like that, I think it could be a fun way to promote to promote your project and share some folklore from Pakistan.
I think I would be totally down to do it. Also, by the way, I told my mother that, Mama, I have this interview thingy, and I showed her your TikTok, and she's like, why is she interviewing you? Is she okay? I'm concerned about her.
What? Because I'm like a big deal? Or
yeah,
it's not sure. You can just tell her I'm a librarian. I'm a children's librarian from Rhode Island, the smallest state in the United States, who accidentally, I don't know, found an audience to do these silly tales. But I mean, you've actually been doing more than I have, like as far as doing the study and the research into it and building this for your community, which is really exciting. So I feel honored to be talking to you today. You can tell your mother that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening today. Be sure to follow Folkloristan on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, at Folkloristan at each one. And if you're not already following me, at Cosbrarian on TikTok, please do. Hopefully Komal will be a guest there down the road to share some of those incredible tales she referenced in our conversation. Be well.